What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Crazy Face Uno podcast. I'm your host, Shane McNeely. Just a reminder, Crazy Face Uno is inspiring others to do good, make a difference in our local and global community. And today, I have a fantastic guest. I've been looking forward to this for a few days now since we've talked. Tyler Dunning, everyone. Welcome, Tyler.
Oh, thank you. Hi.
I've honestly been really looking forward to this conversation. You are someone I definitely look up to and respect a lot, and the things that you've done and that you're doing. And thank you very, very much for being on the podcast and spending your Saturday morning with us.
Oh, thank you, sir. Likewise, yeah, I think if anything, this is just a good opportunity for us to reconnect. We haven't
Definitely
spoken in a while, so
yeah. And that leads to how we met, maybe.
I guess, yeah.
Do you remember the first time us meeting?
I have a vague recollection. It was during a nonprofit Invisible Children tour.
Yes.
To my recollection, I think we came to your university in Minnesota.
It was in Indiana, yeah, Bethel College at the time,
right.
That is now Bethel University. Yeah, you and your team.
Congratulations, Bethel.
I know, growing. Look at that.
Yeah.
Making
we
moves.
Came through.
Yeah.
And you hosted one of our presentations.
Right. Yeah.
You were the point of contact.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah, I remember showing up. I remember there being, it was like a quaint little campus, very nice.
Yeah.
There was a pond or something. You had a table set up outside. It was a group of you and your buddies.
Nailed it.
I remember it quite well.
That's awesome.
And I just remember you had a lot of energy.
Yeah,
Crazy Face.
That's pretty accurate. Which is where the name came from. You know, college. That was my college days. Crazy Face Uno was. Crazy Face in general was my nickname in college, my freshman year. I've told this story before on the podcast, but I think it's always good because it's just an odd name and just random.
I'm curious.
I was on the bus, so I played soccer. I had a small scholarship, and our preseason, my freshman year, was me trying to make the varsity team and whatever. But we were on the bus, and one of the English guys, he from England, and he was sitting behind me, and we were talking, and I made some weird face or did something, and he was like, "Man, you have a crazy face." And he's like, that's what we're gonna call you, Crazy Face. And I was like, okay. And so he yells back in the back of the bus, like, "Hey, so and so, this is gonna be Crazy Face now." And so school hadn't even started, and I had already been given a nickname, and so I went by many different names, but Crazy Face, Crazy, Craze, just different little bits of that. But it's always been, I don't know, I've used Crazy Face, and then Uno is just, it's one, and for whatever reason, I had this adverse reaction or adverse desire to use the number one or those numbers, and when you're creating profiles or usernames. I hate that. I think it looks, I don't know, I just don't like it. And so
Sure.
Uno, whatever you want to say, it's just fun. So that's where the name came from. And I had different inspirations along the way with Crazy Face Uno. And one was Mr. Beast, who is a YouTube star guy. And I was like, if you can have a name like Mr. Beast, then Crazy Face Uno is fine. It's just a brand name, or it's just a name. I don't know. So here we go. Here's Crazy Face Uno.
Now the legacy lives on.
Yep. No looking back. So Invisible Children was how we first met, and it's also, I would say, how we became friends as well, because later on I volunteered my life to Invisible Children as what we called Invisible Children roadies, and that's where I met you. You were interning there, or you were working for Invisible Children as well, and we had
I also saved signed that waiver that gave them my life.
Yes. It's a gift that keeps on giving. And then we also had a bonding moment over wrestling.
Right, I really feel like that's when the connection
that was it.
deepened. was the mutual connection over wrestling.
Yeah, yeah. And I want to get into that because you've
Sure.
got some stories. But first,
Sure
let me
do.
just plug who you are a little bit. You're an author
Okay.
and a writer. Those are the two things that I think of most when I think of you, Tyler.
Okay.
Is as an author and writer. I think that's a big part of your story. Would you agree?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it's something I invest a lot of time into. So
Yeah,
I don't think that's an inaccurate
yeah.
assumption on your part.
And you've that's I guess that's those are the things that I would associate with you. How would you describe yourself, or what would you say that if you were going to introduce our listeners to you, what would you say?
Good question. I would say, I mean, the thing about writing really is that it's somewhat of a vessel into other pursuits. And for me, I mean, I do love just the inherent craft of writing. Like, my favorite part about it is generating beautiful sentences.
Yeah,
So I would say, like, more literary in terms, on the spectrum of writing. I don't really care as much about plot or content. I just like
yeah,
pretty sentences. But within that, the things that I kind of write about most would be like nature-related things,
yeah,
trauma-related things, mental illness. I'm very much like an expressionist writer, a very personal writer, which isn't like the most respected form of writing within the creative nonfiction field at the moment. People oftentimes want you to remove yourself from the I and the me and the
yeah.
self.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's because there's a history, specifically within nonfiction writing, that comes out of journalistic trends where for several decades, really the focus was on reporting things happening out kind of beyond yourself. So then maybe in like the 60s or 70s, when that form of writing became a little more internalized, people
Sure.
looked at it as kind of like a secondary form of the art. And I think because it can seem a bit like masturbatory in a way, like you're just kind of either pleasing yourself through the writing or congratulating yourself. But I think at least with our generation and maybe a couple before us, it really became more of this cathartic therapeutic thing where people turn toward like memoir as these guiding points on how to get through, I would say, traumatic and dramatic life experiences.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that for sure. Which is, would you say that was like maybe part of your book then that you wrote, which is the name is A Field Guide to Losing Your Friends?
Yeah, and I would say that the process of getting to that finalized product of the book was really organic, where I was trying to force myself into being a different type of writer, and this was kind of really in the early phases of me saying, okay, I'm going to take this more seriously and maybe even pursue it as something more than a hobby. And so in that, I was writing a lot of fiction, whether it was long form novel or
Yeah.
short story, and those things, those are kind of what I think people gravitate toward when they first get into like a literary pursuit. And so I was working in that medium, and in the midst of these things, I was always pulled back and drawn to these cathartic essays, mostly around the theme of loss and grief.
Yeah.
And so I kept writing and generating these things on the side to the point where I then soon recognized a thread throughout them, and I said, oh, there's something more here than just these one-off stories that I'm doing kind of cathartically. And then
Sure.
when it came down to it, I said, I need to focus my efforts on one of these projects because I had kind of myriad in the works. And I said, this one feels the best right now. This is the type of writing I like to do the most. So I focused
Yeah.
on that. 6 years later, finished this little manuscript of grief and loss and nature.
Yeah. Do you mind kind of giving us a little more background on your book, A Field Guide to Losing Your
Sure.
Friends? Listen, if you're listening, it's really a fantastic book. I have obviously a lot of the names in there I'm familiar with, Tyler, but I I've given it to. I actually loaned my book out. I don't even have it with me anymore. I loaned it to a friend to read, and he's reading it now. But it's a really great book. You can purchase that book. I'm assuming it's on Amazon.
It is, yeah.
And is it available through your website?
It is, yes.
So tylerdunning.com. You can go there and buy his book, A Field Guide to Losing Your Friends, Essays on Loss. Please go check that out. It's a great book. With that said, would you mind telling us a little bit of the backstory and a little bit about your book?
Sure. The book came about really like the inciting incident of it that kind of drives the narrative throughout the book is that in 2010, Invisible Children lost kind of a key player and a good friend to the organization. His name was Nate Henn.
Mm-hmm.
He was over in Uganda, kind of witnessing firsthand a lot of the things we worked so ardently toward in the efforts of, bringing a little stability back to northern Uganda. And while he was there, during the World Cup soccer match, a series of eruptions went off. There was terrorist attacks, and him, as well as I believe 76 others, were murdered that evening. And so that kind of led me down this path where just a few days after that incident, I moved to Estes Park, Colorado to start working at this wedding chateau just outside Rocky Mountain National Park.
Yeah.
And I found myself, in this tumultuous time and dealing with this specific type of grief, always going out into the national park and hiking. And the thing about that job is that we would work early in the mornings and we'd work late into the nights, but we always kind of had our afternoons off. So I utilized that time to hit the trails. And I was often doing that alone, but really starting to find that going out into nature, witnessing the flora and fauna and really studying it, researching it, led to this path of healing.
Yeah.
So I questioned it, and said, if this one national park can be so cathartic, what would happen if I visited more of these reputable places that, our United States government has deemed national parks? And so I said, well, maybe I should try to visit all of them and kind of set myself on this quest to visit all the U.S. national parks, to which I've currently been to 55 of the 61.
Wow, that's awesome.
That journey, it's been a great journey, and I've seen some really remarkable places across the country, from Alaska to American Samoa to Florida, down where you live.
Yeah.
And but through that journey, along the way, other friends passed away, and the book really recounts these losses,
right,
and earlier losses in my life too. Really, the first of which was a young man named Shane who passed away in a bridge jumping accident. I think I was maybe 17 or 18 at the time. And he was a good friend of mine from the wrestling team, bringing it back to our initial plug for that. But that was my first real lesson in hard loss. And then moving forward, unfortunately, I've had a good handful of people pass away at young ages from various accidents or diseases or murder or self-inflicted slaughter. But the book, the underlying theme of the book too is that I myself have struggled with depression and suicidality since the age of 14. So I've had this intimate, close relationship with death, mostly because I've contemplated killing myself so much. It really shifts your perspective and changes your consciousness in certain ways that to then reflect and put this stuff down on page felt important to me, I think, and it felt necessary. And certainly it has led to a lot of healing in my own life. Really, kind of the capstone of this book is that I set this goal after Nate had passed away, saying, if I want to get to the highest point in northern Colorado, Longs Peak, at 14,259 feet. And I said, if I could get over that mountain, maybe I can get over this loss. It was a kind of a naive, childish thought, but it was a way to process the pain in a very tangible physical way. So I tried to summit that mountain that first summer after his passing, and I failed because I kind of went the wrong way and went toward what is called the false keyhole, where the actual keyhole leads you to the top of the summit. And so then, I think 4 years later, I returned to that mountain and finished that goal, summited, and
Yeah.
but in the process, when I was nearing the top, I came upon a dead body, and that's kind of the final chapter of the book, and
Yeah.
it ties it all together, because here I was thinking I was finally overcoming that grief and getting to the top of that mountain, and in doing so, I was confronted with death yet again of this
Yeah.
young man who ultimately had committed suicide and had launched himself off of one of the cliff faces up there.
Yeah.
And so it really made me have to recapitulate and process these things that I'd compartmentalized and things that I thought I'd processed when ultimately I hadn't. It was as if the world was saying, you know, death will always be a part of this journey, regardless of how hard you try to overcome it. Instead of making it an adversary and something that you contend with, make it a part of the journey, make it something that's collaborative, and recognize that. And I think this is something I've learned from nature is, you know, you look at any natural process and there is death, decay, mulch, rebirth, growth.
Yeah.
This cycle always continues, and these are obvious lessons that get taught to us in the day-to-day life, but things that we often ignore and push aside, and then we treat death as something that is unnatural, and we, you know, dress bodies up in paint and put them in caskets and display them, and we don't ever really see death for what it is, and that is this gift back to the earth in terms of, you know, bioorganic mass that lets other things grow.
Yeah. Yeah. Which nature does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure does.
This story in your book has you were actually on TEDx Teen, is that correct?
That is correct.
Yeah.
Which was, you know, that was a fun. I mean, as with any artistic endeavor, sometimes it opens doors into pathways you never really anticipated or expected. Right. Even though I think in the back of our minds, these are things we're always hoping for, and we always want that attention and that praise and recognition that you've done something important.
Yeah.
I do that with quote fingers for the listeners. So with the book, it also, a good friend of ours, Chad Clendenin, he had heard me read an excerpt from it several years ago, and after that, he messaged me and said, "Hey, I would really like to make a short film out of what you read." And I said, "Sure," not really thinking anything would ever come to fruition, because artistic endeavors often get stymied for myriad reasons.
Yeah.
But it came to fruition, and he ended up making this beautiful 14-minute short film based off of excerpts from the book, also called A Field Guide to Losing Your Friend.
Yeah.
And so him and we released the book and the film on the same day. And on that day, I got a phone call that the producer of TEDx Teen wanted to bring me out to London to do a TEDx presentation. To which I said, I'm not a teen. I'm a 33-year-old man at that point. And she said, "Oh, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You'll be amongst other people of varying ages." And I took her word on that. Bless her heart. And when I got out there, I was by far the oldest person there. There was 16, 17, 18-year-olds doing amazing things, giving amazing presentations. And there was one other person who was older than me. He was, I want to say, a 98-year-old man, but he video conferenced in, so he wasn't actually there physically.
Yeah.
And I gave I'm talking to this crowd of teenagers, giving them this soliloquy on death, and I don't know if it landed.
Yeah.
Kind of in the interims, the intermissions, where people could kind of mingle with all the presenters. Everyone was flocking to these kids talking about technological advances and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And two people came over to me and said, "Hey, you remind me of David Foster Wallace, who was a writer that committed suicide ultimately." And I was like, "That's high praise."
Yeah. Well, I mean, regardless, I guess once those videos are posted, I mean, it's open to everyone, whether it says TEDx Teen in the back or not, and
yeah, true. And it's what's funny about that too is when you're preparing for something like a TEDx presentation, they're constantly telling you that these things are going to be repurposed for the internet, and really that's the main focus of them.
Yeah.
So don't, and because of that, they say like don't focus on being present that evening. So for example, they would say like don't reference other people's talks, or
Sure.
don't reference the theme of the night,
Sure.
stuff like that. And so there becomes this disconnect really between you and the crowd, because
Yeah.
you can't build those bonds between the
Right.
intimacy of the evening.
Which any
And so I
public
think-
speaker knows that that's like how you engage your
Yeah.
audience. And so,
Yeah, it's counterintuitive to kind of the natural training of a public speaker.
right.
But it's true. I mean, then you kind of focus on these things, and then you get product that then lives on the internet and hopefully finds a new life in that way.
Yeah, sure. Sure.
What's funny about it, though, is like in those initial months and years since the talk came out, I think it came out over 2 years ago at this point, I would go onto YouTube and like track how many views it had and how many comments it had, and really try to generate some self-worth out of that. And really all that happened was I would read the comments and people would say like really horrendous shit,
Yeah.
and then I'd feel bad for like a week.
Yeah.
And so I just said, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, well, and man, I'm trying to decide which direction to take this because I've got so many questions and thoughts. It kind of reminds me, Invisible Children, we went through, as a company, we went through some trauma ourselves in 2012, and you were one of the people that came back and volunteered your time. Sorry, I get emotional about this every time I like talk about it, and but you volunteered your time to take on some of the worst, and you took some of those calls that people were just beating us up, and people that we cared about, and which is also really hard and unhealthy and a difficult thing to deal with. I don't know why I'm crying right now, but so here we are. I'm pulling myself together here. Sorry.
Hey, keep it together, man.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't know, that's like, I think about you guys in those scenarios so often, actually. And I think it really speaks to the people that spent their time with Invisible Children and gave their time. And like we said in the beginning, signed their lives away, too.
Yeah.
Of your willingness to come back and to meet a need, and that was the need, and to trudge through some of that crap, and it's so prevalent in today's society, and honestly, that's one of the biggest motivators, not this specific instance, but like just the negativity that's out in the world and on social media and on YouTube channels or whatever it is in our freaking media, like I just don't like the negativity. I don't like the fear. I don't like that. I try to avoid it myself. And so one of the like pieces of Crazy Face Uno is positivity and telling positive stories. And I want Crazy Face Uno to be a place of positivity, and I want it to shine a positive light on the world. And whether it's through storytelling and stories and being able to tell your own story to the different causes that we become and join in and be a part of in the future. But side note on that, but yeah, that's really, thank you. And thank you for sharing your story, and thank you for being a part of Invisible Children and a part of that story as well.
Of course. But now I have to ditch like 75% of the content I was going to talk about because it's so negative.
Dang it, Tyler. Dang
I'm
it.
going to speak ill of everybody that we know.
Yeah, I know that's not true. But what is the process like for you of writing? And I know, at least since I've known you, even back in Invisible Children, I know that writing was always, like, maybe it was just the therapeutic part, but you've always really made time for for writing and be very disciplined, I feel like, in that
Yeah.
that part of your life, as well as like preparing for a TED Talk, which I know you've done some writing. I'm sure you did some writing with that as well, and processing. Is that how you process things?
Yeah, definitely. I'm a slow writer for sure. I think John Muir said writing is like the life of a glacier. It's one eternal grind. And it's accurate, very accurate. And the thing about writing and literature is that it's such a slowly produced art and also a slowly consumed art. So it doesn't really adhere nicely to our current trends of instant gratification. And that can become really disheartening and frustrating. And an example would be, the book is a good example in that it took me about 6 years to produce that book, and it's quite short. It's like 180 pages in total, if I remember correctly. Ultimately, it was about a 300-page book, but then I cut about half of it out.
Yeah,
which isn't uncommon in the literary process. But even so, some of those stories that ended up in there were even older than that, maybe written 10 years ago. And so by the time it was released in 2017, this stuff was already about a decade old to me. And then people were consuming it and reading it and saying, like, whatever reaction they had, I would then react to that through this lens of a decade. So it's new to them, very old to me. And there's a weird disconnect there between producer and consumer.
Sure.
Whereas someone like a musician could write a song today and perform it tomorrow and really gauge how the crowd reacts to that.
Yeah.
So, that took a lot of learning on my part and patience and practice. So now, for example, like before you called me, I was going through a writing session, and I try to sit down and do like 3-hour increments.
Yeah.
And I'm working on a story now, knowing that this thing might not come to fruition and reach an audience for a year, 2 years, 3 years, 10 years.
Yeah.
And you have to be okay with that.
That's intense. That's hard. That's mental toughness and like a discipline and like beyond anything that I can comprehend, to be completely honest.
Yeah, and that kind of gets back to your original question, where people so often come to me and say, like, what are your habits? What are your patterns? How do you stay focused? How do you produce the content at the cadence that you do?
Mm-hmm.
And I have this very unfair advantage over most people in that I want to kill myself most days.
Yeah.
And I don't say that flippantly or wantonly, but I've always had I struggle daily with my suicidal tendencies.
Yeah.
And the one thing that really brings peace back, peace and balance back to my unstable brain chemistry is writing. And so for me, it's not a matter of like, am I going to have the gumption to sit down and write today? It's a matter of like, I have to sit down and write today if I want to be a healthy individual and someone who's enjoyable to be around.
Yeah.
It alters my moods and it. So, that's first and foremost why I do it. A byproduct of that is having content that I can share with people. And luckily I enjoy sharing stuff with people.
Yeah.
So I continue to do so. But I think writing will forever be a process that I pursue in my life simply by means of then processing whatever's being filtered through my mind, my life, my body, my community. And so in that, I never wanted to be a writer. It wasn't like I was young saying, I want to grow up and be a writer. I didn't pursue writing through the education system, even though I think I did well. And some of my English teachers saw some talent there. But what I recognized is when I was working at Invisible Children with you, it's a really emotional, difficult, thing to be fully dedicating and volunteering your life to something that is dealing with, some of these base tragic elements of the human condition.
Yeah.
And so to process that, I was always writing these weird little short stories, and some of our cohort was recognizing that, saying, Tyler, will you read us some of your stories? And will you put these on a blog? And that was kind of the initial groundswell of what became my writing career.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is, you've got a newsletter that you produce as well, a monthly newsletter. Yeah. I know I've shared that newsletter with a few friends, and I know that there's a few people that really enjoy that and really love your writing and love your style. And I think you have a really unique voice, and like through your writing, that is
Oh, thank you.
that's it's different. It's not your typical what you sit down and read, you know? And I think it draws people in, and it's enticing, and it's good. It's enjoyable. It's fun to read and fun to be a part of. You have a way of painting a story and painting a picture that is unique, I think. And everybody every writer tries to paint a picture, but you have a very specific way of doing that, and I think it's special. So keep up the good work. Yeah, yeah. I want to maybe touch on the mental health aspect. You've brought this up a couple times, and I know throughout your book you talk about it. What are other things? Obviously, writing is a huge part of your mental health and staying healthy and being the best version of yourself and to combat some of those. What are other ways that you're dealing with your mental health, and what are some ways that you would encourage other people that maybe are going through something similar or have some of the same thoughts or that deal with mental illness or mental health as well?
Yeah, it's a good question, and these are things that I love pursuing. And if back to your very original question, if I was to categorize myself or label myself in some way, I would probably say that I am a mental illness writer.
Okay.
Much in the way someone could say, I'm a travel writer, or all the different genres that we've since created. But
travel is the outcome, or it's the process that's helping the root, right?
Yeah. But mental illness is always kind of what I'm drawn back to, what my focus is around. That's a tough question, though, because it is so loaded, because mental illness, mental health, whatever you want to call it, it can come through in so many different ways. And the human brain, I mean, we still don't know much about it.
Yeah.
And so these are ongoing research studies. And unfortunately, I think in a lot of ways as with any sort of ailment with the body, we look for these quick fixes where you can either take a pill, or big pharma has such a hand in a lot of this stuff and miscommunicates a lot of information, to the point where I was just listening to a podcast the other day. No offense, I'm not cheating on you, but
no, I listen to other podcasts too. It's okay.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I don't just sit and listen to my own podcast on repeat.
Oh, that's what I envisioned.
I know. I should. Maybe I should.
I only read my own writing. But I don't even know how true this is, because who knows the level of expertise of podcast goers. But anyways, this person was saying that there really is no hard data that says, chemical imbalance in the brain leads to something like depression or anxiety, where someone can have a lot of serotonin and still be depressed, or vice versa, not have much serotonin and not be depressed. But it's this narrative that we keep telling ourselves that there's a chemical imbalance in the brain, and that then you have to take some sort of drug to rectify that. These are things I've always been apprehensive of, and even from an early age, since I was 14, same timing as the onset of my depression, I made this choice in my life, which I no longer adhere to, but I became straight edge, and I didn't even know what that was at the time. I was living in Montana. There was nobody up there that was straight edge. There wasn't the social media that there is now. And so I was just this little, farm kid that said, I don't want to take prescription medicine. I don't want to drink caffeine. I don't want to drink alcohol. And I think that was a byproduct of looking around my community, especially in rural Montana, and seeing how destructive things like tobacco and alcohol can be in households and people's lives and in community. And so I just chose to completely disengage from that. And so, up until the age of about 25, I never had a drink of alcohol. I wouldn't drink caffeine, things like that. And so that obviously carries throughout your life in different capacities. And so now when I look at something like selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, I'm like, I don't know if I want to put that in my body, because I don't ultimately know what it's going to do to my brain chemistry long term. And if I ever get off the drug, and you hear these stories of people that are, on ramping, and then they have heightened desires within, suicidality, and when you get off the drug, similarly, and those sort of things just really scare me. So I think I kind of subconsciously chose to do it my own way, which has been focusing on exercise, focusing on diet, focusing on things that I know trigger me, um, focusing on things that I know do help, like writing. But the baseline of my life is depression, and
Mm-hmm.
every choice I make throughout the day is in some way informed by that. Like, will this make me depressed? How will this affect my depression? What will
Sure.
this do to my overall moods? And I think anybody, when you look at their story, there's something like that there. It's whether they've had certain trauma at a young age and they're dealing with parental issues or a lack of love or trying to compensate for that lack of love, whatever the case may be. The things that inform our decisions throughout the day often are rooted in a lot of our youth. And so mine is depression, and that's what informs my life.
Yeah. Yeah. That, and it sounds, I mean, even going through that day to day is, it sounds exhausting. I don't know any other way to put it, of kind of thinking through those. Is there ways that you kind of rest your brain and rest yourself? Is that through writing? Is that the way that you kind of rest?
No, that's through Netflix.
Yeah. Netflix and chill, man. Netflix and chill.
Honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, writing is exhausting.
Yeah.
Exhausting physically, just in and I don't think people think of this often, but when you're actively stimulating your brain in that way, so much blood flow is going through your brain that your body physically gets tired.
Sure.
Which I enjoy. So that's why I do it for 3-hour increments, because I've recognized I can't do it longer than that.
Yeah.
So I might write for 3 hours, take a several-hour break, and then write for another 3 hours, something like that.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's as exhausting as it sounds.
Okay.
Just because I think I've learned to cope with it. I think when I was younger, to a developing mind and to a mind that didn't fully understand what was happening to me physiologically, it was exhausting. But now I think I have a better understanding of it and ways to cope with it. And so, and I being on the other side of it, where it doesn't affect me nearly as much as it used to, I have an appreciation for it in some capacity, where it has given me this unique perspective, and it has given me, the ability to focus on writing more and get more enjoyment out of that. And it's informed my relationships, and I think the more you talk about it, the more you're open about it. At least my experience has been that other people open up and talk about it too, and it's been kind of a joyous experience to find a community in that and meet other people who are struggling in similar ways, but then to find reprieve in knowing that we're kind of going through this together. And it's an epidemic. I mean, so many people are struggling with these things, and it's on the rise. I mean, I think there's only one state in the United States that hasn't had a rise in suicidality, and that's Nevada, of all places.
Really? Interesting.
Yeah, so it's a growing pandemic, but and it's being perpetrated by things like social media and growing pressures, and I think just the fact that they're like, the world population is rising at such a rate, and so many more people are moving and living in urban areas. I don't think that helps, evolutionarily what our brains are meant to do. And so we're struggling and with learning how to be human beings in the 21st century, and no one really knows what to do with these things that are flaring up as real major issues.
Yeah, I think we'll look back one day in our lifetime. I think we're going to look back and look at social media and the way that the rise of social media and some of these different platforms and the way that we conduct ourselves and the way that it functions as we know it now. I think we'll look back someday and shake our heads at, like, what were we doing? I think it's got to take form in a different, or take shape in a different form as things grow, and as social media and as the internet and as technology advances. It's just gotta look different. It's got to take a different shape. Yeah, go on. I don't know if
I was just gonna say that's such a big issue that everyone kind of seemingly has opinions on, but it's one of those things where, the Sorcerer's Apprentice, we've built a device that we're now dependent on.
Yeah.
And
I'm the first one to admit it. Like,
yeah.
I mean, it's a thing.
And everyone sees the downfalls of it.
Right.
But also, I mean, that's not to negate the positivity that's come out of such things as well. I love
Absolutely.
Google Maps and knowing where to drive.
Yeah.
But we're kind of all adhering and accepting of this demon that is kind of tearing us apart socially and culturally for these minute benefits of, I don't know, complacency and comfort and the ease of, and that's not uncommon of the human history as a whole. We're always progressing towards these things, and the Industrial Revolution gave us so many benefits, but also it's completely destroyed our
planet ecosystem. Yeah. 100%. I'm right there with you. Which maybe leads us to, you've got a writing seminar that you're going to be a part of and kind of conducting. Do you mind telling us about that?
Sure, yeah. It's something I'm really excited about. It's coming up in October 18th to the 20th, I believe.
Awesome.
This idea came out of, rooting it back to Invisible Children.
Mm-hmm.
So many long-term friendships came out of this thing. And for me now, a lot of these friendships are a decade old. One of which was with Bethany Bilesma. She was a key player on the Invisible Children scene.
Yes.
Everywhere she goes, everyone loves her.
Yes.
And
near and dear to my heart as well. I've mentioned her name multiple times on the podcast as well. So,
yeah, and her and I now have found ourselves both living in Seattle, and we've been pen pals for a long time, and just good friends. And so we came up with this idea of doing like a therapeutic writing retreat, because her training in graduate studies brought her to counseling psychology. I myself, a writer by trade, and so we're kind of combining those efforts and going out to Whidbey Island, which is just outside of Seattle, this beautiful kind of bucolic place, and holding this retreat at what's called the Whidbey Institute. And there's just beautiful little cabins and space and labyrinths to walk through and good food. It's just a wholesome place of regeneration, kind of outside of the city. And it has, you've probably noticed trends just in my talking over this hour that I'm not much of a city dweller. I do think humans are better in rural settings, just physiologically.
Yeah.
And so I think the thought in this is that, especially for me making my way through the literary world, there is such a romanticism to self-destruction and not being well, essentially. So like people, we've praised these authors like Fitzgerald and Hemingway and myriad others who drank themselves to death.
Sure.
And produced great work, but I think we've then equated the two and maybe made an unfair correlation, saying that you have to be an alcoholic to be a writer, or you have to be some sort of addict, or you have to be abusive or destructive or self-loathing, whatever. And I think it's time to change that narrative, and I'm seeing that coming through in various ways. But creativity isn't born out of crisis, not always. And so I think it's important for writers to come together and eat good food, do yoga, support each other, create healthy habits, and live in this idea of wellness and train in a way like an athlete would. Because if you're an athlete, you want to be at your apex for your sport. So you train every day, you treat your body with respect, you treat your mind with respect. I think the arts and creativity and entertainment is no different.
Yeah, that's awesome. I've looked at, I know that Bethany, she's got a few different, projects with, with her project of different retreats and whatnot. And I looked seriously before this move. I was looking at all of those and looking at yours, and the writing portion, and just putting myself into a situation or a place where you're being intentional. Intentionality is like in the forefront of my mind these days, and whether that's friendships, through some of the losses that we've had recently, to just my friends. I've moved and I've gotten away from, maybe we have these friends from Invisible Children that live all around the country and all around the world. And it's hard to stay connected. We're talking right now and it's been a while. We haven't really had a conversation in a good while. I can actually probably remember, I think it maybe Fourth Estate was one of the last conversations we had. And, it's just interesting when, being intentional about those relationships. And for me, in some ways, this podcast has been an avenue for me to reconvene or reconnect with these relationships and have a intentional conversation. But even outside of that, having these intentional conversations. And so being intentional about writing, it's something my brain never stops. And I process. And then I want to, my easiest form, I think my comfort zone is to externally process, which can be okay. But it can also be really exhausting for the people around me. And so
like me.
Yeah.
I'm an internal processor.
Right. And so finding other ways to be able to process some of the things that are going through my head, and with Crazy Face Uno, just being able to write and write my thoughts and not have to be perfect and have actually formulated a sentence yet, but just put down your thoughts and put down words on a paper and move them around and figure out what that looks like. And so I think it's really cool what you're doing and having that intentional moment of peace and being in a place where you can focus in on writing and on what you're working on or whatever that is. I think that's really cool.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. What would you, is there where can people go to find out more information? Can they go to your website?
Yeah, so if you just go to tylerdunning.com, there's a lot of stuff there. And then the writing retreat is called Tender Wild Writing Retreat. And Bethany's website, I believe, is thetenderwilds.com.
Sweet. Perfect. So check that out, guys. We plugged it in the beginning. This is what I'm most excited to talk about. Everything's important, but our connection to wrestling, and the path that you've taken with that in some ways. So we both were wrestlers in high school. You were wrestling in high school, and you've gotten into some quote professional or semi-pro, whatever the style would be, that I think people would put a picture in their head of the WWE style of wrestling. And you did this in the past, and we had a bunch of conversations about this, at Invisible Children and in the past. But you recently got back in a little bit, or it kind of got your feet wet?
I'm doing. Got my feet wet. I don't know if I'm going through, the early phases of a midlife crisis or what, but I've stepped back in the ring for the first time in over a decade.
Wow. Stunning Tyler Dunning. Are you still keeping the same name?
Probably not. I mean, that's the thing too, is I'm not pursuing this in the hope or anticipation of doing shows.
Yeah. It's a hobby.
Me, it was just I just wanted to, move my body in a different way, I suppose.
Sure.
Reconnect with some old muscle memory. I guess for a little context, there's a lot of different forms of wrestling, and people kind of get them muddled in their mind. You and I, as you said, we were amateur wrestlers in high school, also called collegiate style or folk style.
Yeah.
So the reason I did that, I was never really an athletic kid. I think I had tendencies toward it, but I never really found sports that I enjoyed. I was never much of a team sports person, and I think a lot of that kind of roots back to depression as well, where some things would get triggered when I was doing team sports and being around other people in that capacity.
Yeah.
And so when I was 14, I was flipping through the channels, and I never really cared about pro wrestling up until that point, but happened upon a WCW match of Rey Mysterio Jr. and Billy Kidman, and just in that moment, I saw these two men that were classified as cruiserweights. So they're like smaller people in terms of height and weight.
Yeah.
And I just saw them performing this beautiful craft, this beautiful art with their bodies and utilizing each other's bodies, and that collaboration and partnership to say like, hey, let's come together through this means of expressive false fake violence and put on a show and kind of heighten the range of this viewers' emotional response, and bring them through the story arc. And I mean, this was all kind of subconsciously happening in my brain, but in this match I said, this is what I want to do with my body. Maybe in the same way if someone was watching collaborative dance, salsa or swing dance or something, and say, hey, I want to move my body in that way with another person.
Yeah.
And so from 14 on, I was just said, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to become a pro wrestler. And at that time, there was this kind of upsurgence of wrestling biographies coming out. And one of them was this guy named Mick Foley, who wrestled as Mankind. And he, in his book, he said, if you want to become a pro wrestler, one of the best things you can do is join the wrestling team.
Yeah. And
I was a junior at that point in high school, so I joined the high school wrestling team only because I wanted to become a pro wrestler. It wasn't.
That's awesome.
It wasn't one before the other. And so
awesome.
I joined the wrestling team and really came to enjoy it a lot and found a sense of identity in that sport. So then when I was 19, instead of going around the country looking at universities to attend, my father and I flew around the country and went to pro wrestling schools. And
that's awesome.
I went to a couple and kind of had my short list of the ones I wanted to attend. And then that summer when I think I was 18 or 19, attended a camp down in central Missouri. It was a 5-day camp. And by the end of it, they awarded a couple of the students these full scholarships to train for free. And I won one of those. And so then I said, fuck, I guess I'm moving to Missouri to become a pro wrestler.
Yeah.
Which I did. So then I pursued that for, probably 5 years and wrestled all over Missouri and the Midwest and the country and some international stuff as well. But really, I had some of the best training in the country and in the world. I was trained by this guy named Harley Race, who's revered as one of the best wrestlers in the 70s and 80s and really of all time. He was just this really hard knocks, no nonsense type of guy, and he trained us very well. And so now even to this day, so a good example is I got back in the ring a couple weeks ago, and the trainer was like, what's your background? Where do you come from? And I said, I used to wrestle in this small town called Eldon, Missouri. And he said, oh, you're one of Harley's boys.
Yeah.
So even the
his reputation, reputation is big.
But yeah, I'll give you just a little story of what getting back in the ring has been like, because it's funny, doing it in a 19-year-old body opposed to a 35-year-old body. But there's two promotions out here in the Pacific Northwest in Seattle.
Okay.
One's called Defy, which is a very good promotion, but they don't do any training, but they bring in amazing talent.
Okay.
The other one is called 3-2-1 Battle, which I haven't seen one of their shows yet, but they're not as polished as Defy, and they do training in this little gym called Evolve. And so I was looking into it a year ago.
Yeah.
And they don't have a website. They have a Facebook page. They're not that responsive on Facebook Messenger. So I just there's a lot of shady things about the wrestling industry. So you got to be really apprehensive on who you get affiliated with.
Yeah.
Because it's your livelihood. It's your body. You could be wrestling with guys with really poor training, and they're giving you a tombstone or something, dropping you on your head.
Yeah.
So I was a bit trepidatious, and so I messaged him a little bit, and then a year went by, and then I don't know what happened, but all of a sudden I was like, I really want to get back in the ring.
Yeah.
And I said, when I was 19, I moved across the country to do this. I think I can drive 3 miles down to South Lake Union.
Right.
So I said, fuck it, I'm going to do it. And I went down there not knowing what to anticipate, and I show up, I walk into this gym. They do Muay Thai, or they do kickboxing, they do mixed martial arts, they do boxing, and then they do pro wrestling. And I walk in, and I think they're this Muay Thai kickboxing training's going on, and I walk up to the counter. There's this woman there, she's just on her phone, and I'm like, excuse me, and she's like, what? I was like, is there wrestling tonight? She's like, it was canceled. And I was like, well, someone told me to be here. She's like, I don't know, I don't work here. And I was like, what's going on? So then I turn around, and there's this young guy kind of hobbling with crutches and a cast on his leg, but he's wearing a wrestling shirt. And I said, "Are you a wrestler?" And he goes, "Yeah." And then he goes into this tirade about how he broke his leg. I didn't even ask. And I was like, "Are you like? Is there training tonight?" He's like, "I don't know." And so then, in the midst of this conversation, another guy walks up. He's wearing a singlet with a clown face on it. And he just starts talking to me. No, like, introduction. He just says, "Hey, like, check out my new kick pad. It's got a picture of Kelly Kapowski on it from Saved by the Bell." And he's like,
That's
"I like
hilarious.
to kick people and yell, Kapowski." And I'm like, oh my gosh. And I look at his arm, and he's got a Hatchet Man tattoo on his deltoid. And I'm like, this guy's a juggalo. And I don't know if you're listening to this and you don't know what a juggalo is, Google it. Not gigolo. It's not a male prostitute. Juggalo. It's a follower of the Insane Clown Posse. And I'm just like, what? I'm a 35-year-old man. What am I doing here? What have I got myself back into? And then the trainer shows up, and I'm like, how do I get in the ring? Who do I pay? What do I do? He's like, I don't know. And in my head, I'm just panicking.
Yeah.
But it all gets situated. So then we start the training. I don't know what to anticipate. Like, training when I was 19 in Missouri was brutal. It was so intense. And I'm just like, I don't know if it's going to be that brutal. We'll see.
Yeah.
And the trainer, at the very beginning, he's like, all right, let's start with 100 jump squats. And I'm just like,
ooh, baby.
Oh no.
Yeah.
So I get to like maybe 15 jump squats, and my body is wasted.
Yeah.
And just full
let alone the
lactic
next
acid.
day. Yeah.
And I'm like fighting the urge to vomit. And this is the first 10 minutes of class, and this class is 2.5 hours. So then we get in the ring, and we're running the ropes. We're doing front and back bumps. We're doing all the things you do.
Yeah.
And luckily, like, a lot of it came back very naturally. Like, I can run the ropes fine. I can bump just fine.
Yeah.
Some things didn't, though. Like, jumping over the top rope, couldn't do it, which is something I used to do with such ease. So it's been a fun experiment of saying, like, what are my limits? How can I redirect this effort in a way that better suits my new body? But I don't know. It's a fun venture, and I'm excited about it. But so I did it for 2 weeks, and then just a couple days ago, speaking of my old age, shingles fucking broke out on my forehead.
Oh no!
And so, yeah, and I don't know. It's like a resurgence of chicken pox. It lives in your spinal cord and attacks when it feels like your body's at a weakened state of immunity. So all of a sudden, I'm just watching TV, and my forehead breaks out in this massive.
Painful,
festering wound.
Yeah.
And so I can't get in the ring. It's contagious. So I think I have to take like 2 weeks off.
Oh no.
I was just getting going. And that's another thing I think to an aging body, listeners will understand, in that it seems the same like when I just try to get back in shape. I go to the gym for a week or two, and then all of a sudden my knee hurts, or my neck, or who knows what.
I'm right there with you.
Just stymied in the process by who knows what.
So, I mean, now you can just practice your jump squats, so you can get that those 100 jump squats in by the time you're 2 weeks.
I couldn't walk for 5 days.
Oh, I bet. It
was brutal.
That's like,
but I loved it.
That's also the part of when you go back to the gym and you haven't been for years or a good chunk of time, and I'm gonna do squats today, and then you can't walk for the next month, and
you're
like,
you just
dang
never
it.
Go back.
Yeah, and you're like, well, but I tried. That's the worst. That's fascinating. So what is you touched on it a little bit, but like, what is training for that go? I mean, there's different stereotypes, different people, and depending on who's listening and your view on professional wrestling, you've got a different like idea of what that is. The words fake get thrown around a lot, but I think that cheapens the amount of effort and the amount of skill and honestly athleticism it actually takes to do some of the maybe the right word is stunts or like the wrestling that takes place in the ring.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that at all?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in this day and age, you hear a lot of talk about things like implicit bias and stuff like that. And I would say there's certainly an implicit bias around
Yeah.
professional wrestling, and you hit it right on the head. Like, you hear those words, and you're like, oh, that's fake, that's trite, that's cheap, it's hack, it's over the top, it's misogynistic, it's
Hmm.
macho, it's toxic masculinity, it's all these things. And unfortunately, like Vince McMahon's version of pro wrestling, which has come to fruition in the form of WWF and now WWE,
Yeah.
he's told a very specific type of story with wrestling, and
Sure.
unfortunately, that's really what most people know about. The way I equate it, I say, like, if you were just to turn on pop radio and listen to a Taylor Swift hit, or well, who knows what, and say all music is equatable to that. That's what
Yeah.
music is. It's kind of what we do with pro wrestling.
Yeah.
But there's a whole independent scene, just in the way there's a whole independent scene in the music world. And that's where, like, the real true talent lies, and the good storytelling, and people pushing the limits, and shifting and adapting the craft. And so for me, it's like you get in the ring, and to your first question, what's training like? It's really difficult, and the reason being is that it's a such an astute mixture of anaerobic and aerobic activity.
Hmm.
So, for example, it's a really mixing up, like sprinting and powerlifting. So, from 1 minute to the next, you're like hitting the ropes, running full speed, ducking under a man that's leapfrogging you, jumping over him when he goes for a drop down, and then taking a hip toss and taking an arm drag. And, you're going from running full speed to then lifting a man who he might be 200, 250 pounds. And it's really taxing on the body.
Yeah.
And so you
Which
have to train in a specific way. And there's nothing quite like it.
Yeah,
out there.
I really love your analogy of the powerlifting and sprinting at the same time, because even
Yeah.
in the amateur collegiate, wrestling world that I'm familiar with, and I've been a coach in and whatnot, it's really hard to explain. And my first time even in that world was, I was a soccer player. I could run for 90 minutes and not stop. And, I was in amazing shape. And I was like, whatever. And I got talked into and taken to the wrestling room, and, we're like messing around. I didn't know what I was doing, but I was exhausted. I was winded. I was out of breath. And it's a completely different, shape to be just even in the amateur or the collegiate level, or folk style, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, it's incredible. Just reflecting back on like high school wrestling, it's you do a 6-minute match where
Yeah.
how long is a soccer match? Like
90 minutes.
90
Yeah.
minutes, yeah. But you do 6 minutes, and you do 3 increments of 2 minutes, and you
Yeah.
get a little break in between, and yet it is so physically exhausting.
Physically exhausting. The hardest thing you'll do in 6 minutes. And anybody
Absolutely.
that thinks that it's like they watch, and I have a greater appreciation as I watch like the world level guys and the Olympic level guys, as I'm watching them, and I'm like, they have not let off the gas since they touched the mat. And
Oh yeah.
and then they go off and run sprints and cool down. Their cool down is like, running, and it's
Right.
insane. It's insane. And so I love that analogy, because it is a sprint. You're using every, muscle, everything's tense. And then you throw in the different moves and the different things that you guys are doing, and the pro side of things. And it's a whole
Yeah.
nother game.
Yeah, and similarly to like amateur wrestling, you embed it in your body so that it becomes muscle memory. You just
Right.
train it over and over and over. But another element of pro wrestling is that it is so cerebral, in that so while you're performing in this physical way and having to be in incredible shape, you're also having to adhere to the base logic of storytelling. So you're ushering the crowd through the story in a way, and like if you dissect any wrestling match, they're all the same
Yeah.
in terms of format and structure. And so you learn the structure. They call it ring psychology.
Okay.
And so you're building a match, sometimes in the locker room, but oftentimes while you're just out there on the fly.
Yeah.
and you're performing in ways that have to logically make sense to a disbeliever, because everyone comes into this saying like wrestling's fake,
Sure.
and so they're looking for the flaws in it. They want to see the seams. They want to feel elevated in a way of saying, "Oh, I heard that wrestler call out this next move, or I
Yeah.
see where the faults are in this." But the best wrestlers are the ones that can suspend disbelief to the point where, like, even to a disbeliever, you sit there in awe and get goosebumps and say what
Yeah.
they just did is amazing.
Yeah.
And so you're trying to generate those moments for the viewer. And so the best wrestlers aren't necessarily like the most physical or the ones that are in the best shape or that can perform the most amazing feats. They're often the ones doing the most simplistic things, but doing them so crisp and clean and doing them for a reason. A good examples would be like, you knock somebody down at the beginning of the mat, you cover them for the pin, and then it's like 1, 2, long 2 count, they kick out.
Yeah.
That's something you often see at the end of the match, but you would never do that at the beginning of the match because you're not supposed to be that wasted yet. And so
Yeah.
you kick out maybe at a 1 count. And these are all the things you have to think about. Or like, you perform a big move at the beginning, and then you perform that same big move at the end, and you might react to it in the same way, or you might fake the injury in the same way, but like you shouldn't, because you should never start out with your big stuff. And
it's a build.
I don't know. There's so much to it, and in a funny way, it equates very similarly to storytelling and writing.
Yeah.
And I've learned so many odd lessons from it. But the point being that it's a form of entertainment. It's a form of storytelling. It's not a sport. But even though it is highly physical.
Yeah.
But recently someone asked me, like, from my years as a wrestler, what was the main thing I learned? And emphatically, I just kind of said that everything in life is just as fake as wrestling. And so
yeah.
When people call it fake, I'm like, well, everything you watch on Netflix is fake.
Yeah.
Most of your interactions in your day-to-day life are fake.
Yeah.
Very, very few times do we have genuine authenticity in the things we perform and do in life. And
yeah,
wrestling, I think, is just a representation of that, almost a characterization of that. And I think that's why so many people are drawn to it. And what's amazing about pro wrestling is that I could talk to my 7-year-old nephew about it, and he knows everything about it. I could talk to our friends in Uganda about it. They know everything about it. I could talk to my 100-year-old neighbor.
Yeah.
Everyone has an idea and an opinion of what professional wrestling is. It's become quite ubiquitous culturally and globally. And because of that, it's very apparent that it is tapping into a base form of storytelling in the human spectrum.
Yeah. What would you say your like favorite or your favorite big move is?
Ooh. Gosh, that's a good question. Mostly because I've always been a big fan of like the smaller, more technical wrestlers. I get more excited about wrestlers who are really crisp and clean. Like examples, I kind of came up in this era when like the small wrestler was kind of elevated in respect. So like Rey Mysterio Jr. was always such a favorite of mine. Like Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko, people from that era and that time, they were so clean in what they did and did it with such like authority and intention. So seeing like Chris Benoit just do any form of his submission holds looked so good, and he sold them so well. But Mysterio, like he was such a spectacle to watch. So seeing him do like jumping off the top rope and doing a hurricanrana onto somebody, just the ease and grace with which he did that, I always popped for that.
Yeah. That's fun.
Oftentimes, too, like, I might see these big moves and not applaud them. I might be like, that was really dangerous, and I don't know why these guys are doing that.
Yeah. But seriously, there are some really dangerous things that people do and, like, put themselves... I mean, the wear and tear on the, the WWE guys, the WWF, like, ladies, like... it's incredible. Like they've go through and beat up their bodies quite intensely.
Yeah, it's not. Well, that's what's interesting about it is that people look to wrestlers as kind of the epitome of health. It's these people who are in seemingly incredible good shape.
Yeah.
But oftentimes it's is supplemental, whether it's through human growth hormone or steroids or what have you. And that's not to take. I mean, what pro athlete isn't doing some sort of enhancement drug, but that isn't to take away what they've done. The problem with it is that since it isn't a regulated sport, there's no off season. So like these people are expected to look amazing year round, and so they're on steroids kind of year round. They don't cycle off. They don't take like an estrogen blocker.
Right.
Because you're supposed to do maybe like a 6-week cycle and then take at least 6 weeks off. And these people aren't doing that. And because of that, being on the road year round, just the general wear and tear, the kind of drug culture that goes with it, whether it's alcohol, anything else, you start accruing injuries, and then there's really no job security. So that instead of taking time off, you take pain pills instead. And so by the time you're 35 years old, you're having heart attacks, and that's not an exaggeration. I mean, Eddie Guerrero I think died at the age of 36 of a heart attack.
Crazy. And those are the things that don't get talked about or you don't think about necessarily in that world either. One thing you started off when you first started off, I mentioned Stunning Tyler Dunning. That was like your stage name. Where did that name come from?
I mean, just I think the obvious rhyme scheme of it.
Yeah.
I think I could trace it back maybe to my like senior class trip. You take at the end of the school year.
Yeah.
We were driving from Montana down to Salt Lake City to go to a theme park down there. And I think one of my good friends from my wrestling team on the bus ride down had said something like, "Oh, you should be Stunning Tyler Dunning," or something like that.
Yeah.
But it just seemed like a easy, natural fit. And then if you look at the acronym, it's STD, which fits in with the kind of over-the-top motif of pro wrestling. And so I never really went by that, but fans would show up with signs that said STD, and they would chant it. And
that's awesome.
So it came through a little bit.
And so you don't necessarily think now you'll be performing necessarily or on that? You just like the training portion of it, or do you have any ambitions
For now.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, I don't want to go in with these high expectations or aspirations to perform. And honestly, I think a big reason for that is fear of injury, where
absolutely.
Training obviously, that's exactly what it is. You're there to learn and to be safe and healthy, where the problem with like the type of show wrestling that goes on is that's where people pull out all the stops. And unfortunately, like on the independent scene, people are always trying to like out wrestle each other, outperform each other in ways that come through as just who can do the craziest shit. Yeah. And so my fear would be like I would show up to a show and the promoter would say, "All right, Tyler, you're going to wrestle this guy tonight. It's going to be someone that I don't necessarily know very well or know at all." And then this person might say, "Okay, tonight I want to do a quadruple backflip onto you while you're outside on the ring apron, and then we're going to bump into the crowd over the guardrail."
Yeah.
And I don't want to do. I don't want to do that shit. There's no reason to do that for a crowd of 50 people.
Yeah.
A good example is this young man I just met recently that had a broken leg, and he said he did a moonsault off of the top rope into the crowd. And
what is a moonsault?
It's I apologize for the jargon I'm throwing.
No, it's okay. I just that one sticks out to me that I've got to ask what a moonsault is.
Moonsault is just kind of your run-of-the-mill backflip onto somebody.
Okay.
Where like a shooting star press would be a gainer where you're doing the backflip forward. So doing moonsault is just the backflip backwards.
Gotcha.
So I mean, he's wrestling in front of a crowd of 50 to 100 people that gather every 2 weeks, and I don't know what his medical bill is going to be for that now, but he said one of the pieces of the bone in his foot is on the other side of his foot.
Oh.
And he's just kind of telling me this with a chipper romantic attitude, and
You're like, nope, that's what I want to avoid.
Yeah. So it's just, I think, at that level of maturity where you get to the point you just say, what's the ROI on this? Like, what?
Yeah.
Like the crowd's gonna pop for a moonsault. They're gonna think it's cool, but you could get that same reaction from them, kind of in the way of like what I was saying, like a Chris Benoit or Eddie Guerrero.
Yeah.
They could get such a good reaction from the crowd doing something so simplistic just through the use of better storytelling.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Tyler, man, it has been really good to talk to you.
You as well. I apologize for everything.
And for nothing at the same time.
And for nothing.
No, I really do appreciate you. I do really respect you and the things you're doing, and I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us. Is there anything you would want to, tell our listeners, or any advice, any thoughts, any information? I'd love for you to, give them plug your stuff one more time. And
oh goodness. I mean, I don't know if I'm one to deal out advice.
Sure.
What I mean, for me,
I don't know if anybody is. Let's be honest.
Get through the day-to-days. I think about, like your theme of the show, do good.
Yeah.
And for me, I'm always trying to figure out what that good is. I'm thinking about like that Rumi quote of like, out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there's a field and I'll meet you there. Or thinking about like karmic waves through a Buddhist notion where like positive waves and negative waves are kind of the same thing. And the point is to not generate waves at all and have any karmic residue when you leave this world. So my current exploration and focus is just like, what is the damage of the ego and how do I kind of mitigate that? How do I, live as this conscious being? And one of my favorite representations of consciousness came from Steinbeck. He called it the tragic miracle of consciousness. We are these creatures that have some sort of separation, at least to our own knowledge of having consciousness, and what that means now coexisting with 9 billion, was it 8 billion? We're at 8 billion.
Yeah, I think 8.
Other living entities, that's just humans that also have this perceived form of consciousness.
Yeah.
What is good in that, and what decisions do we make day to day that we don't even really think about that affect people globally or locally in adverse ways or negative ways? I don't know. What I could deem good most likely is bad ultimately. So
one more time, what was that?
I just said what I deem good at this point could ultimately be bad for a lot of other people.
Sure.
Or a lot of other living entities, plants or animal wise.
Yeah.
So for me, I just, I do the work that I know I can do that brings peace to me and I hope brings peace to others. And in that, it's just storytelling and it's writing.
Yeah.
And looking to connect with people who find some sort of connection in that too.
Yeah. And I echo that. I mean, I hear exactly what you're saying. There's been a lot of, not a lot, but there's been a few people that have kind of pressured me into defining what do good and make a difference is. And I don't know that I want to do that. I think it's much easier for us to, I think that that we can all tell you what is not good in some ways, like, what doing true. Bad is, when it's not something that's good. And so why do I need to define anything beyond that? And
that's a good point.
Staying open to the idea of doing good. I don't know. I can't define necessarily specifically what doing good is. I can give you examples and I can give you things and causes to be a part of that I think are doing good. Do all of those have consequences? Absolutely. Both negative and positive, Everything we do, whether we eat a banana and throw the peel away or we put it in the compost.
Yeah, where'd that banana come from,
Exactly. Yeah, but we could go pretty deep into that.
Know. What pesticides were used on that banana? And what watershed is that going into?
Right. But seriously, like, some of those things are important. But yeah, I don't know. I hear you. Thank you for that little bit. I appreciate that, actually. So,
Sure.
where can people find you on social media? Do you?
Oh, TylerDunning.com is my website. Tyler Dunning on the Instagram. My favorite way to connect is through the newsletter, like you said,
Yeah.
because social media has become such a crapshoot. Where like I
Yep.
can put something on Instagram, I don't know who's seeing it, I don't know who cares,
Yeah.
I don't know if I care.
Yeah.
But I really do enjoy. I put the newsletter out once a month.
Yeah.
That way, I at least know it's making it to people's inboxes. I get a lot of analytics on my side where I can be like, oh, 30% of my readership open this newsletter.
Yeah.
And then I can assess whether or not that makes me happy or not.
Yeah.
But but at least I know I'm putting out the content that I deem like ethically worthy of sharing with and putting in the bandwidth. And then people can email me back and engage in that way, and that feels good to me.
Yeah. How can people and listeners subscribe to your newsletter?
Yeah, if you just go to my website, if you go to the contact section, you can sign up for it.
Perfect. And we'll post some things too, just in the post here. So keep a lookout for that.
Bless your heart.
Yeah, get people. Hopefully, we can get a few people to sign up to your newsletter and
Well, thank you.
to listen to some of your writing. And I really would encourage people to buy your book. Obviously, you benefit from some of those sales as well, and it's just a good book. I think it really. I really loved it. I thought it was a great book. It really made me think. It really gave me a different perspective, and yeah, I think it's a really great piece of work, and I think you should be proud of that. So,
Thank you,
Tyler, thank you very much. I appreciate it for coming on. Thanks again.
You're so welcome.
You're the best, man. You're the best. Everybody out there, remember, do good, make a difference, find a way to be a part of our world beyond yourself. And thanks again for listening. Thanks for taking part and listening to our story and Tyler's story about his life. Remember, you can go to crazyfaceuno.com, check out our store, view our content, and engage with us right on our posts and subscribe to the podcast. All right, everybody. Thanks so much. I love you all out there. Peace.